Okay, so now we're gonna install the Unreal editor. So, unrealengine.com, that is the website. Get Unreal. Download launcher, install Epic Games Launcher, then install Unreal Engine. Let's get the launcher first. What do you want to do with this? Save. So that's the launcher. And then let's open that. And we have to install that. Epic Games Launcher setup, install. Give it a moment. Installing Epic Games Launcher, and oh, looks like we got a permissions thing. So, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? Yes. And now we wait. Alright, verify Epic Games verifying update, downloading. This may take some time depending on your internet connection as well. So, let's see. Cleaning update, installing prereqs. Do you want to make? Yes. Not sure if you can see that, but there was various permissions. Something about Windows asking you, do you want this app to make changes to on your device? Alright, let's see where we are now. Oh, here we go. Okay. Sign in, or sign in with Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, Google, Apple account. I'm gonna sign in. You're gonna have to sign in with your login information as well. I'm gonna sign in privately and then we'll go from there. Alright, sign in complete. Please continue. Press continue to close. And now you can close the window. Alright. Okay, looks like it didn't work. I have to try again. Hold on. Okay, if you don't have an Epic Games account yet, you will need to sign up for one. So, in my case, I need to create an account. So, I'll be right back. Okay, so it's just the usual, enter your birth date, enter your preferred username, and then you need to add in a not a two-factor authentication, but rather a verification code that would be sent to your email. I'll be right back. And just like that, I think we can continue now. Epic Games privacy policy, gotta read through that. Yada yada yada. Alright, continue. Epic Games. Unreal Engine 5.5 is now available. So, let's just go ahead and install Unreal Engine 5.5.0, well, 5.5.4. Unreal Engine pricing options. Unreal Engine is free to use in the following cases. No royalty on the game's first $1 million, yada yada yada. Free to use for educational purposes, which is this case. So, let's proceed. Gotta read the EULA. Just pretend I read it. Choose install location. Yeah, I'll just go with this default path here. Install. Do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? Yes. And now we wait. This is about 14 gigabytes worth of stuff to download, so this may take some time. I'm gonna pause the recording and I'll come back to you later. Alright, looks like we're on the verge of complete. So, I'm in the library tab of the Epic Games Launcher, and right now, Unity Engine is almost done installing. Well, verifying. Wait, it just hit 100%. Come on. Still verifying? Come on now. And cleaning up. Do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? Yes. Anything I lost video. Okay, perfect. Now we have the Unreal Engine installed. Do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? Yes. Well, I just clicked on launch, and now Windows Defender Firewall has blocked some features of this app. Allow access. I'm on a private network, so yes, come on, allow. And there we go. This is the interface we're greeted to make a new project. It's gonna save whatever project I make now, it's gonna be saved under it's gonna be saved in a Unreal Projects folder in your Documents folder. So for now, what I'll just do is I'm just gonna create a test project here, and then we'll just go from there. So this is just me making a test project right now. And the options for coding your Unreal project is to use either C++ or a blueprint. I said in the past that the Unreal Engine uses C++. Well, that was a lie. Well, technically it was incomplete. There is another option that is to use a blueprint, which is an alternative to using C++. Yeah, we can use C++, but if you know you're gonna be working with the nitty-gritty of the code, you would want to use C++, but you can just use Blueprint instead. So I'll create this test project, and we'll see what the interface looks like. When you create a new project, it will take some time to, well, create the new project. So give that some time. And just like that, we are now in Unreal. Alright, so we will be working with a first-person shooter for our first project. So really, this is actually the wrong project. So I guess I'll meet you on the other side for when we are ready to talk about that. So I guess I'm gonna have to stitch this with the rest of the video. So yeah, I'll leave it to future me to talk about what to do next, okay? Hello class, this is CSE-4410, sections 1 and 2, week 10, spring 2025. Alright, now we're working with Unreal. So, I'm going to tack onto this video a how-to on how to install the Epic Games Launcher and Unreal Engine for the very first time. Assuming you went through that entire process, before we even get to that, I'm going to point out the system requirements for So the following system requirements are gonna be from the Epic Games website itself. So they are as follows. So I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that any reasonable gaming computer made within the last few years, as long as it has at least 16 gigabytes of memory and at least has a quad-core CPU and has a decent graphics card, you're probably good to go. Recommended specs as listed on the Epic Games website are as follows. Windows 10 operating system, quad-core Intel or AMD CPU, 2.5 gigahertz or more, 32 gigabytes of memory. Yeah, that's quite a lot. And you might not have that much memory on your system, but you might be able to get away with probably half of that. 8 gigabytes or more graphics RAM, and graphics card that can support DirectX 12 or 11. For macOS, the specs are going to be different because Apple has its own processors instead. So Apple Silicon M3, so you might be able to get away with M1 or M2. 16 gigabytes minimum of memory, though you might want to, though recommended is 32. Mac OS 13 Ventura, or the latest version of that. That is for Mac. For Linux, minimum specs, any reasonable new Linux distro from CentOS 7.x and up, kernel version 3.x or newer, recommended specs, Ubuntu 22.04 for the operating system, quad-core Intel or AMD CPU, 2.5 GHz or faster, 32 GB of memory, GeForce 2080 graphics card, though right now we are at the 5000 series, so anything that would be equivalent to the 2080 today. 8 GB of video RAM, and yeah. The specs in the textbook are not too far from that, though they are specific to Windows. So Windows 10, a good Intel or AMD CPU, 16 GB of memory, and specifically something equivalent to a GTX 1080 graphics card. I guess my biggest concern is the fact that this memory requirements, they are pretty steep memory requirements. I know that some of you might have laptops that don't even have that much memory, but see how well it runs. And if it doesn't, you might want to upgrade your system, or at worst, run it on your home computer if you have a home computer that is powerful enough for this. Anyway, when you install the Epic Games Launcher, you will need to sign up for an account, but once that's done and you have the Epic Games Hub installed, you can just click the Install Engine button that's in the corner of that window, and once that's done, you'll have that Install Engine button replaced with a Launch button here. I'm going to click that, and that's going to launch the Unreal Engine version 5.5.4 as of recording this video. Now we're going to wait for this to set up. So we wait. Alright, so if you're already familiar with Unreal and or have made some projects in the past, the first thing you'll see are, well, your recent projects. Regardless of whether you have any projects made in the past or not, click on Games and click on the first person template here. Select C++, give this an appropriate name. I'm gonna call it My Shooter Game because I had already used up My Shooter for a previous test run. Select a suitable place to save your project. Oh, by the way, just Blueprint or C++? Okay, so blueprints are Unreal's way of coding, programming. It's a means of programming that uses a node-based interface where even non-programmers can use it to program a game. You can use either E++ or blueprints, but you're probably, in practice, going to use a combination of the two. We are going to select C++ because we actually want to look at the code that is generated. So I'm going to click Create, and we're going to wait for it to create. In the meantime, let's do a rundown of what we are going to be covering. So Chapter 1 is literally just install Unreal and create a first-person project. Chapter 2 is literally just this is how you program in C++. Chapter 3 is this is the basics of object-oriented programming. So, maybe it's a good idea to review what object-oriented programming is. So, under the paradigm of object-oriented programming, code is written to reflect how real-life objects work. I have a can. So, a can is an object and has several variables and functions associated with it, such as open the can, drink out of the can, get how much liquid is left in the can, what is this, get the size of the can, like the radius and the height of the can. It also has variables for such as the calories, how What is the calories of the can? What is the ingredients that make up the drink? What is the expiration date of the drink? What graphic did they print out on the can? And of course, there's another function that we can add, and that is question can. But here's the thing. I have another can. This can is going to have different traits. It's going to have different values from this can. So these two cans inherit, they are both based on the same class, but they have different values. They have the same way of opening, but they have different volumes of liquid. You can still drink out of them the same way, but they're gonna have different contents. They're gonna have different everything. And it's gonna be different from this can. So all of these are cans. They are based on a can class. And let's just say it inherits from a base class that is a can used for canned goods. And if you really want to think about it, it's probably going to be inheriting from another base class called cylinder. So a cylinder is inherited by the can class used for canned goods. But then that class is used for these aluminum cans for drinks. So, much like those cans for canned foods, with those kinds of cans, you typically just want to dump out the entire contents. And that's that. With these things, we typically don't dump out the contents into a container all at once. But I'm gonna get more into the weeds of object-oriented programming, probably when we get to chapter 5. But for now, hey, look at that. Our game is ready. So this is our entire first-person template. So this is an entire template that sets up a first-person shooter with a gun that we can pick up and blocks that we can shoot at. So moving around the scene is the same, more or less the same as it is in Unity. Right-click, drag to move the viewport. Middle-click, drag to move the scene to the left and right. One thing you might notice is the controls for panning around the scene might be backwards from what you're used to. So I am moving my mouse to the left, but the scene is moving to the right. That is reverse from what I'm used to. So I'm gonna go to Editor Preferences, click on Viewport, and the option is Invert Middle Mouse Pan. Set that, and now if I middle click and drag to the left, the scene moves to the left. If I move to the right, if I move the mouse to the right, the scene moves to the right. You might want to go so far as to set that as your default. That's just something that you might want to do, so that way you don't have to change preferences every time you create a new project. Oh, while we're at it, while we're in Editor Preferences, search for source code, and through here you can choose what code editor you want to use. I'm using Visual Studio 2022 because I already have that installed. You might be able to get away with Visual Studio Code, but the tech spec recommends us that we use Visual Studio. So, okay, so we have an entire game that we can play. Let's play it. Alright, so controls are WASD or arrow keys. I'm gonna use the arrow keys, but because I've never used a QWERTY keyboard for like the past decade or so. I can move around, I can walk into these blocks, and I can pick up this gun here. So anyway, I started blasting. I'm pretty sure that block went into the void. If I can get an auto clicker to work on this. Anyway, so that's the entire game right now. Really not much to do, but really the point of the template here is to demonstrate. It's for demonstration purposes. So. Pick up the gun, fire projectiles across the room, knock balls all over the place. Blocks up all over the place. So, yeah. A fully functional character controls, all there. Item pickup, all there. Interactivity with the blocks, all there. So yeah, that's the joy of working with Unreal, in that a lot of the things that we would have to write code for back in Unity, some of them are just written for us. We can just adapt it to our needs. Okay? Alright. So, let's continue with our presentation here. So, I talked about object-oriented programming, my spiel about the cans from before. Objects contain attributes, fields. Those are your public and private variables, and functions or methods. In C++, they're just called functions. They do stuff, such as there's a function to open the can, there's a function to drink out of the can, there's a getter function that would tell you how much liquid is left in the can. There's also a getter function that tells you what the ingredients on the can is. There's a getter function for the graphic on the can. There's a getter function for all the other text on the can itself. There's a getter function for the barcode as well. So yeah, various getter functions. Not so much setter functions. So I guess you can, with the can, have setter functions for liquid to pour back into the can. Don't know why you'd ever want to do that, but you can. What would a getter function for the liquid in the can be? Just taste? Anyway, Chapter 1 is setting up Unreal. Chapter 2 is how to use Visual Studio and work with C++. Chapter 3 is all about object-oriented programming. Chapter 4, we're actually gonna go in and inspect the code for our sample project here. So, in the content browser. Oh, by the way, if you don't have that content browser, click on Window, go to Content Browser, and click Content Browser 1. When you start up Unreal for the very first time, you might not have this content browser. And when you do open up the content browser, it might be floating around as a window like this. Just dock it to the game view like as so, and adjust the size so it doesn't take up like half the screen. And now we have a setup that's not unlike Unity, in that we have the assets here and the inspector on the right. What we don't have is the hierarchy on the left, but that's because the outliner, that's the Unreal equivalent of the hierarchy, that's on the right, and then below that, that's the inspector, or details as it's called in Unreal. So let's go back to these game objects. We can more or less move them around the same way as we did in Unity, where if we click on an object, we get these little handles that we can use to move game objects around the scene. One difference between Unity and Unreal. Unity uses left-handed coordinates, where the X, Y, and Z axes, the X and Y axes are the floor, and the Z axis is height. With Unreal, it's sideways, so it's still left-handed coordinates, but we're using I'm probably gonna break my hand by doing this, but if this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis, z-axis is height. So unlike with Unreal, the z-axis is height. X and y are the floor. So think of the xy plane as being the floor. Z-axis is the height. In Unity, the xz plane is the floor. Y is height. And that's also true of Minecraft as well. Anyway, let's go to the content browser and open up the C++ classes folder. So you're only gonna get this if when you created this project you selected the C++ option back in that menu option, back in those menu options. So let's open up the C++ folder, and we now have these 5 C++ classes here. Let's open all of them. Well, actually you only need to open one of them. So what I'm actually going to do is, in the Solution Explorer, I'm going to open this Games folder and open up my shooter game here. I'm going to open up this source folder and this folder here, and now I can now open all of these classes. So we have, actually I have 6 different header files here. So this one doesn't really contain much of anything, so we can just ignore that one. Really, the classes we're gonna look at are my shooter character, my shooter game mode, my shooter pickup component, my shooter projectile, and my shooter weapon component. So we don't have to deal with my shooter.h here. And the reason why I'm calling it my shooter and not my shooter game is because I already used up the name my shooter previously, so we don't have to deal with this header here. So the other 5, we're gonna work with those. So let's start with my shooter character. So the code in here is probably going to be different from what's outlined in the book, and that's because, well, this book was made with Unreal version 5.03. This one is 5.5.4, so this book's already updated. But my hope is that it's up to date enough that the information inside the book is still relevant. So let's tease through this my shooter character class and see what's up. Okay. We have, of course, several include headers here. That's typical of a lot of C++ programming, but some of these are for the Unreal Engine itself. We also have several classes here. U input component, U skeletal mesh component, U camera component, U input action, U input mapping context, and F input action value. These are declarations for even more classes, but they live outside. They're outside this my shooter character header file. You're gonna want to get used to these purple lines of code, and those are macros. So these macros are associated with the Unreal editor also, and they are used for various things. I'll talk about some of these right now. So one of them is called generated body. You gotta have that. That is something that you must have. So, but before that one is this uClass macro. That is a macro that indicates that this class is part of Unreal's reflection system. That's a system that interprets information, macros, and specifiers to process associated C++ classes, variables, and functions. So line 20, that is the declaration of our class itself. A my shooter game character, or in your case, a my shooter character. You'll notice that it inherits from another class called a character. So, unlike with Unity, where the most amount of inheritance we've ever done was having our classes inherit from modding behavior, inheritance, you're going to see this a lot in Unreal. So, a my shooter character inherits from a class called a character. By the way, why is it called a character and a my shooter character? Well, that's because a character is a class that inherits from another class called a pawn. That class inherits from a actor, and per Unreal naming conventions, any classes that inherit from a pawn must also any classes that inherit from a actor must be prefixed with a capital A. And that's just a naming convention, like how in C++, how in C# interfaces are prefixed with a capital I. So anything that inherits from a actor must start with an A. So a my shooter character, which inherits from a character, which inherits from a pawn, which inherits from a actor. As I said, this generated body, that generated body macro, we gotta have that be the first line of our class definition. These variables here, U skeletal mesh component, U camera component, U input mapping context, U input action, and such, those are declarations for private variables. Well, in this case, these are pointers. So, you probably might get a good idea of what's going on here. So, this is a mesh that is for the character. This camera component, that's for the camera. You can probably recognize what some of these are, but some of these you might not be familiar with, but don't worry about it. A lot of the code here, there's just enough details here to give you a good idea of what it's for. Jump action for jumping, move action for moving, look action for moving the camera. Yeah, remember how in the Unity project we wrote code for mouse look and then character movement, and we never got as far as to add jumping to our game, but some of you did. Yeah, a lot of those actions, they are pre-programmed in Unreal. So, the character that we had in the game when we played this, yeah, basically, character movement and player input, all of that was already provided for us. You'll notice that all of these variables, there is a uProperty macro before them. In this case, this uProperty macro, how it is set up in this case, it's like serialized field when working with Unity. There are also other specifiers such as visible anywhere and edit anywhere. These are specifiers for uProperty. They control how the property behaves with various aspects of the editor and the engine. Allow private access equals true. So category equals input. That specifies the category of the property when displayed in the blueprint editing tools. So that's just for categorization. And then we have meta equals allow private access equals true. Yeah, so this uProperty, for our purposes, it is behaving like serialized field. If you're familiar with C++ code, you might be able to recognize this. It looks like a function, but has the same name as the class. That's our constructor right there. And then following these are two functions called move and look. So you can probably infer just by the name alone. This is for player movement, and this is for when the player moves the camera. You might not be able to recognize what these are, and that's okay. All you really gotta know is these two functions are from the base class, and they are overriding something. Oops, I broke the camera. Hold on. Let me just fix up the camera. Right, there we go. Camera fixed. Okay, so you might not be familiar with what an override function is, or you might be rusty. An override function is if a class inherits from a base class, it might need to change how some of those existing functions work. So, let's go back to our example of cans. If this can is implementing a can class, and this is for a drink can, but it inherits from a can that is used for canned food. The means of opening canned food might be with a can opener, but we don't need to use a can opener here. We don't need to use a can opener here, so we might need to overwrite the can opener. We might need to overwrite the open function so that instead of having to pull out a can opener, we just use our hands. So that's what an override function is. It overrides. It changes a base class's function so it suits the functionality of the inheriting class. And then after those, these might look familiar to you. Those are getter functions. So this one gets the mesh, and that mesh 1p is all the way here. That is the mesh for the character. And then we have the camera, and then we have jump action, move action, and look action. So those are jump, arrow keys, and mouse movement, basically. If we go to that class's corresponding CPP file, so this is my shooter game character. Let's myshootergamecharacter.h. Let's go to myshootergamecharacter.cpp. So now the code's a lot more involved, and now we can see the constructor in all of its glory. So we're creating a camera component here, and then we're creating a mesh component that will be used when being viewed from a first-person view. You might not be able to deduce what's going on with these functions here, such as notify controller changed and setup player input component, but you might be able to suss out what's going on with move and look. So we are using f input action value as input, and we're getting a movement vector, and we are using the y and x components of that vector to basically move the player to the left or right, and also forward or backward. So those, basically, this is character controls for moving the character. And then similarly, these are character controls for moving the camera. So it's like the mouse look script that we wrote back with Unity, except all the code is done for us. We can also tease through the classes for all the other. We can yeah, we can also tease through the headers for all the other classes. So this is my shooter game weapon component.h. We have a lot of properties associated with the weapon. The fire sound, the fire animation, the muzzle offset. And also, who is holding the weapon? See, all of these are for the weapon that the player is holding. My shooter game projectile, that's for the projectile that's fired out from the weapon. Pickup component for, that is the pickup component. So the weapon that the player grabs, it's sitting on the ground and the player must walk up to the weapon, enter that overlap the, yeah, so the player has to overlap with the space of the weapon to be able to pick it up. So on sphere begin overlap. Okay, so yeah. So the player walks up to the weapon. The player's capsule collider, because the player has a capsule collider. It overlaps with the sphere collider of the pickup component. Once the two overlap, the player picks up the weapon and the pickup item disappears from the world. This one is for game mode, so we're not gonna talk about too much about that right now. So, my shooter game character, this is for the character and character controls. This is for the pickup component that the player walks up to and picks up. This is the projectile, and this is the weapon itself. Neat that we have a lot of pre-generated code just right there. So as I said, so now we're going to get into content that's not really discussed in the text here. So blueprints are part of Unreal's visual scripting system. That it allows programming using a node-based interface, and it's an alternative to programming for non-programmers. But they are still useful for seasoned C++ programmers. When you create a new Unreal project, you can choose either Blueprint or C++, but you can still use the other after the fact. In fact, in practice, you're going to want to use a little bit of both. You also have an entire folder full of starter content. So if we go to this all folder here, content, starter content, there is a library, a small library of various props that you can just place around the game. And we can also rotate these however we want. So there we go. So these are all static meshes, and you know that they're static meshes when they have SM at the beginning of their name. Again, that's just the naming convention. Also, there's a cyan line on these objects icons that tells us that these are static meshes. So I'll put a shelf here. I don't think I put it right, but yeah, forget the shelf. Let's put a chair. So yeah. So now we've populated the scene with other game objects. There are other pieces here, and we could use these to white box an entire building as well. So we could probably build an entire building using these pieces here. And yeah, we could probably, yeah, it's through these that we can white box an entire building. Look at that. You might want to play around with this in your own time, by the way. By the way, they are static meshes, so I cannot... Yeah, they are static meshes, so some of these I can't interact with, some of them I can. These are just static walls, nothing special about them in the sense that they don't do anything when I hit them. You also have some materials here as well. So these are materials, and like how in Unity we have materials, Unreal also has materials. Well, any 3D context is gonna have materials. So you know that they're materials when they're prefaced with an M and they have a green line in their icon. We can also just drag and drop these. Look at that, we have a brick wall now. And look at that, we have a brick pillar. And if I just do this, we have now a brick floor, but the tiling might have to be adjusted. So I'm just gonna undo that one for now. That's the basic floor. Okay, so that one's not tiled quite right, but whatever. I'm just gonna deal with it. I'm just not gonna worry about that, but we can just drag and drop materials like how we dragged and dropped materials in our first person shooter back when we were working with Unity. So we can white box a scene more or less the same way we did in Unity in Unreal. But the fact that we have these pre-made materials means that we don't have to. When we start for the very first time, we really have a lot of things that we can just use right off the bat. As a sponge once said, everything is chrome in the future. So we could just make everything chrome if we wanted to. And we can try it again. Works the same as before, except everything is chrome. Except for these brick walls. We can still just interact with the scene objects here. Shut it down. Admire the reflection of our gun in the chrome walls. And yeah. So this is a white box scene. I just applied some materials just for funsies, and there are some also props that we can use. If you want even more props, there is an asset store for Unreal. It's called Fab, and go to Window and click on Fab. Something went wrong. So Unity has an asset store, but so does Unreal. So you can browse for assets. I recommend the free assets because, well, they're free. So if you want more assets for your game, well, here you go. Yeah, basically, take your pick on what assets you would want for your game based on what kind of game you want to go for. There's a tweening library. Reminds you of Lean Tween. So this includes code-related stuff. So not all stuff from the asset store or Fab has to do with actual video game assets. Some of them are just more on the side of code for coding purposes. But anyway, we can just play around with the Unity editor as such, just place down game objects in the scene, making it look like how we want it to look. We can make everything chrome, or we can just have a brick house. that is steel, and this is rust. Yeah, so various materials that we can apply to our game objects here. That one's blinding, but I guess it's at the right angle to reflect the sun. So anyway, at this point, I know it's a bit of a cop-out, but I would like for you to look into a tutorial on Unreal, simply because this has us really hit the ground running. So look into a tutorial on how to work with Unreal during your own time, so that after spring break and when we get to week 11, we're basically hopefully ready to go for when we try making a top-down game. So we're gonna, by the time we come back from spring break, we are gonna be working on chapter 5. Okay? Alright. Alright, so this is gonna be it for this intro to Unreal. And by tutorial, I especially mean a tutorial that's about the programming side of Unreal, especially if you want to look into blueprints. So, because this book doesn't really talk about blueprints apart from how to make a blueprint. So, if blueprints are something that you're interested in, please look into a tutorial on your own time, because when we get to making our top-down game, we are going to be working more with the code on that, okay? Okay. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video. And yeah, as I said, I'm going to tack on a video. I'm going to tack onto this video a clip on how to install Unreal for the very first time. Okay? Alright. So that's, as I said, that's going to be it. And we'll pick up from there after that. So, by the time you watch this, it might not be spring break already, but by the time you do get to this and it's already spring break, I hope you have a good spring break. Look into Unreal. Practice around with getting used to the scene. Look into how to program with Unreal, and then we can start getting to work with making a top-down game when we get back to class. Okay? Alright. Take care, and see you next time.